fruit, and we have in a nutshell the word transportation, and all of the others. In the regard, when we're talking or when we're speaking, we intend to convey a message. We intend to apply studies by means of visualization, application itself. We got to remember what is our physiologic world, what it is, how it works. We understand that eventually because we study abroad. When we also learn and understand the reasons, in other words, and its purposes. But we've got to embrace what that means without taking physiology out of context or out of our own character, to which physiology it applies, which is our mind, our intelligence, rather than personality. Since we are, in my opinion, theoretically, between intelligence and personality, Jamie H. Shushan's Pocket Guide to College Success, page 40, chapter 3, motivation and goal setting, says, first paragraph, motivation matters. If this is the first time you are thinking deeply about motivation, you might ask yourself why it is important. It's not about doing anything. Motivation, it's chemical. Motivation has nothing to significantly speak about or mention when it comes to why we need motivation. No matter what context it's used in, and no matter what perspective we stand to support in the regard, there are different types of motivation. Motivation has only to do literally with whom applies his or herself in a way that does not reflect motivation. His or herself. Chemical things are so prominent to us, we've come to understand those things supposedly are commonly mutual grounds we encounter together all the time, or enough to assert we're alike on those terms. Our personality matches someone else. We wouldn't think that had we not miscalculated the rate at which chemicals are discharged in our body, if we understood there is an on switch and an off switch to our physiologic body that we are under the impression theoretically moves non-stop so that we can stay alive, we'd understand the different intervals in which we're responsible each individually for regulating and harnessing how it is we feel emotionally, based on what takes place when we apply or have applied all of our five senses, or either of our five senses, frankly. Those of us that are able to do so have taken time with oneself, not taken time out of oneself. Motivation, it works, but it takes, like you wouldn't imagine, work. Motivation is to draw this line from right to left. But as we watch this line, now let's watch another one. Draw this line from left to right. That's motivation. Every inch of the way, every moment is my personal motivation. We could take a ruler and look at the few inches here, give or take a few, or we could use our senses and look in time how much motivation I subtract, energy I exert, my physical use, my physiology, how much time I subtract, how much motivation I subtract or exert, and understand as I continue how much motivation this says I'm capable of applying to oneself. We don't just have to add to come to things. Adding is necessary to come to a sum, which is the center of things. But early on, we can add or subtract. And when we're dealing with the middle area, like what's going on, a conflict between the beginning of a story and the end of a story, we don't need the sum then. And what people lack today, if you will, and I stress again, that's plural, not singular. The sum has yet to come into play, as studies reflect, and study groups, dyads and group things today. Now, it's fair as the numerator to imply a variable x. Where we are, with all respects to math and science, is trying to establish the denominator. We know how we can get to the equivalent to x. We can solve the equation. We can solve for the variable x. But that's either a side of the story. That's not in the middle where the conflict begins. See, in steps, there's such thing, step one, and we can go from, in sense of time and in regards to time and distance, beginning, let's put a positive sign there, or plus, and to end, a negative sign or a subtraction symbol. And we could embrace that moment, that increment. And then we still have left, if it's a 3-step process, we still have to go 6 more paces. Because in step 2, there's 2, a beginning and an end. And that would encapsulate step 2. And here in step 3, we'd have a beginning and an ending. And that's how we looked at the example early on with the words we use: fruit, vegetable, transportation, and a broken down format that went on, that we could have still been on right now and babbling possibly on, because we came up with types of fruit. And with vegetable, we came up with types of vegetables. With transportation, we came up with vehicles, types of transportation: air, space, railroad, asphalt, concrete, hardcore, hard, soft, aerial, aquatic, submarines. We went through that. And as we look here in this lesson, as we've advanced on, proceeded in this discussion, if you will, we found something interesting. There is something we do that's consistent, and it, in this regard, is more consistent than the pattern at which we apply our studies. That means we can decide either to go with the variable because it's unknown, and so is our opinion about how health affects us, plural and not singular, or we can settle for the discussion that goes further into the things, plural, compared to the thing, singular, if you will, that we ponder or explore to discover, theoretically, things, plural. Normally, one thing, singular. Because we, once again, intend to reflect ourselves so that plural others can see what it, singular, is we're implying or conveying. We're between plural and singular. And for the words that we articulate by our natural sound production, that study or experiment, frankly, is going to go on and on and on and on. Seismologists can input on this discussion. Physicians can input on this discussion. Coaches for sports or athletics can input on this discussion. Athletes can input on this discussion. Entertainers can input on this discussion. Architects can input on this discussion about either the alphabet or numbers we've used in a host of degrees, or this one page around which we've encompassed what our real conflict is, without damaging this page, its significance, its composition, or its general purpose. The question is, what have you been paying attention to during this discussion? The article or articles, or the discussion itself? Our words, the talk. Because establishing that information for oneself is going to determine how healthy one concludes the journey of health for the time being today, to constitute some time for nutrition practice, to replenish the body with energy, as well as to avoid energy depletion by exhaustion through stress, that's distress. Because as this discussion, though it's about to conclude, can continue at a different time, not a different place, theoretically, we're still left with the ability what's called intelligence. This kind of thing. Getting it done. Need somewhere to write? Got it. Articulate. Sure. Left side, right side. Well, articulate's done, sir. Sir or ma'am, I understand. However, a clearer picture to me is this line. Whether it separates left from right or not, which doesn't mean I don't think it does. It just means it's where my attention is concentrated, without a doubt, from the time it appeared to the present moment. That being said, I want to associate left with right. I want to associate right with left. I won't disassociate left with right or right with left either. How much I've said talking should have done that, so that I can concentrate on what I'm going to mean when I speak about left and right, in associated terms as well as disassociated terms, so that someone can understand when I say left, right, right, left, no more, no less. We've got to learn the articulation in what we do when we're talking as well as what we do when we're speaking. Because until we do that, until each individual does that, we're going to intend to convey a message. We're going to ultimately convey one, but it's not one that we have to pass forward at that time. So it's going to be debatable whether or not we're conveying the message, if it's a message or if it's information. Those two, they can be applied at the same rate. I don't want to put too much more on at this time because early on we were concluding. So, once again, what have you been paying attention to during this discussion? It's the question to answer between when it was first asked and the next time we began this discussion.